Hi everybody, welcome. Today I am making a magical floating cloud castle cake. I've actually had this idea in my head for a while, so when I saw the game Unicorn Glitterluck Cloud Stacking, I instantly knew it'd be the inspiration for my next cake. This game is made by Haba and is for little bitty kids. To play it, you work together to stack clouds and unicorns and collect glittery crystals. It makes me wish my kids were little again. Alright, let's make this floating cloud castle. First, I'm adding a layer of American buttercream frosting to my board, and then I begin stacking up my cake layers. This is a 15 by 10 by 2 inch cake that I leveled and torted. And then I add a nice thick layer of pink buttercream frosting, and then I add my next layer of cake and another layer of buttercream. Once I have my cake into place, I'm carving the sides to make it look like a puffy cloud. To make it look more realistic and cloud-like, I baked 3 different sizes of half-sphere cakes, and then I randomly placed them on the top of my cake, which I think makes it look just like a real cloud. Once I have all of the cloud half-spheres into place, I cover it in a layer of my buttercream frosting. Next, I'm making rice cereal treat half-spheres. I made the treats and then I pressed them into my silicone baking molds. Once they had set up, I attached them underneath the board with melted candy melts. This will add some puffiness under the board so it's not looking so flat. I did go overboard here on the Rice Krispies and I did end up cutting some of those off later. I got the entire thing covered in buttercream frosting so that the top and bottom are cohesive. Next, I decided to add another puffy cloud cake here on the side so that I could add an area for one of my unicorns. If this cake were for someone else though, I would have put it on its own cake board, but it's just for my own family, so we don't mind. Once I got it covered, I smoothed it out with a hot spatula. The fondant I'm using here is satin ice, but I've mixed it with modeling chocolate. It's a 50-50 mix. I do this when I know I need to blend seams. It wasn't perfect by any means, but it looked pretty good. I draped the fondant mix here and I'm tucking it under the cake and cutting the fondant with my kitchen scissors. It takes a few pieces of fondant to cover the entire cloud, but it does not have to be perfect underneath because no one is actually going to be looking underneath it. Once I had it covered, I'm using a sugar shaper to help blend the seams, and I'm also running this tool in between each cloud puff. I got my airbrush out next and I'm adding some light blue shading in between each cloud puff. I like adding a little color like this, which I think adds some depth and dimension to the cloud. Here I'm cutting away my parchment. I forgot to mention the fondant board. I covered my board in fondant with Tylose mixed into it and I let it dry out overnight. The parchment was there to help keep it clean. Now onto the castle. I've already cut my board into a square shape and I drilled a hole in the center. And I also cut out half circles at each corner for the turrets. Alright, I'm stacking up more cake and buttercream, and then I'm covering it in white chocolate ganache. The ganache is a 3-to-1 ratio. And I do the same for the smaller circle-shaped cake for the top. I'm smoothing it out with a hot spatula, and after I have it smoothed, I decided to add another layer of cake to make a pointed roof. So I'm adding another cake, and then I begin carving it into a point. I ran out of ganache at this point, so I covered it in buttercream frosting, which also worked out fine. Next up are my turrets. I made these out of a wrapping paper tube that I covered in aluminum foil tape. This is a non-edible part that will need to be taken off later. Just be sure to tell your customer that it's inedible. I brushed them with edible glue and I wrapped them with pink fondant. Before I can add my castle to the cloud, I decided to make a flat area on the cloud for the cake to sit in. And actually, I popped the cake onto the cloud, marked where I wanted it to sit, and then I took the castle cake off and cut away the cloud to make a flat area for the castle. I added more buttercream frosting and then I added some plastic straws for supports. I pressed the straws into the cake until they hit the board, and then I cut the straws flush with the cake. My turrets are going into place next, and these are attached to the castle with melted candy melts. And then carefully, I lower my castle down into the cloud. I had to mess around with it a bit to get it to fit nicely, but I eventually got it to sit perfectly into the space that I carved out. To cover the castle, I cut out squares of fondant and I placed the fondant onto the sides of the cake. Then I cut the fondant to the exact shape using my X-Acto knife. I did each side like this, and I used a sugar shaper to clean up the edges. Using different fondant cutters, I created decorations for my castle. This one was made using a frill cutter, which makes a great trim for the top of the walls. And I also made stars for the doors and windows, and I added a couple silver dragées for the doorknobs. I made the tops of the turrets out of fondant that I modeled into a cone shape. If it gets too sticky, you can dust your surface with cornstarch or powdered sugar. Once I was happy with the shape, I added a strip of light pink fondant that I swirled around it. I placed the tops onto my turrets. I did not add any edible glue because mine stayed by themselves, but you can add it if you need it. Okay, one more cake to go. This top cake was covered in light pink fondant around the sides. I just unrolled the fondant around it and I cut away the extra. For the top, I draped a darker shade of fondant over the cake. I smoothed it out and trimmed off the excess. To embellish this top cake, I added a pretty fondant strip around the edge that I made with another frill cutter. Before I put my final cake on the top, I added 3 straws for support. And then I added a layer of buttercream frosting and I popped that final cake into place. Okay, just a couple more decorations. I added some rectangle pieces of fondant to look like bricks. And I added another swirl of light pink fondant around the top of the cake. To add some shading, I airbrushed along the edges of the cake and around the door. In the game, if you remember, you have to collect glittery crystals. So I made the crystals out of isomalt sugar called Cake Play that I melted and I colored pink. I sprinkled some edible glitter into the mold and poured the sugar into the mold. Once they were all set, I popped them right out. To make the flags, I'm starting by cutting out 4 diamonds of fondant. I brushed the top of a lollipop stick with edible glue, and I wrapped the diamond-shaped fondant around the top of it. I also added a silver dragée to the top. Getting closer to finishing. Okay, I do not want this ugly board showing, so I'm covering it with a cute ribbon that I'm hot gluing on. And next I'm pushing my flags down into the turrets. And I'm adding a cute gold star to the top. I also made 3 unicorns. I didn't film the making of these because there are a bunch of unicorn videos already on YouTube, and they're actually pretty good and easy to find. I'm getting those into place, and I'm adding my glittery crystals, and I'm finishing it off with more edible glitter. My floating cloud castle cake is complete. Thank you all for watching, and if you have any ideas or suggestions for me, please let me know down in the comment section. Bye everybody!